Yes.
And this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital.
And welcome to Music 101. Music 101 is created to empower music itself and legendary icon in the music industry. And today, another week, another great episode. Famous one hit wonders, songs that rule the charts once and never again.
As this is a story of the music fans that can be faithful or fickle, but we're covering an odd and rare bunch of songs. Some songs are massive, but then drop entirely off the charts. The artist is never heard from again. It's one of those quirks of the music business. We ask, what happened? So, when most people think about one hit wonders, you might think of a couple, but we're going to go over some over the decades.
Over the decades, and we thank you for those hits that never come back. For sure. So today's this exclusive club artist who hit number one and then completely dropped from the charts. How rare are we taking here, Mr. Meg?
Well, when most people think about one hit wonders, they're thinking about artists like Dexy's Midnight Runners with Come On Eileen or Thomas Dolby with She Blinded Me with Science. But what we're discussing today is something exponentially rarer, artists who achieve the ultimate musical success, a number one hit on the Billboard Hot 100, and then never appeared on the charts again, ever. To put this in perspective, we're talking about maybe a dozen artists in the entire history of the Billboard Hot 100, which began in 1958. One Reddit user who tracks chart statistics noted they had documented 704 top 40 hits, 159 top 10 hits, and 15 number one hits, but only one artist who had just a single chart entry that happened to be number one. That's not just rare, that's practically impossible in the music industry. Think about it this way: reaching number one typically indicates massive commercial appeal, radio support, and industry backing. Usually, that kind of success creates momentum for follow up releases. Record labels invest heavily in promoting the next single, radio stations are more likely to add subsequent releases, and fans actively seek out more material from the artist. The fact that some artists manage to completely buck this trend makes them fascinating case studies in the unpredictable nature of fame. What makes this phenomenon even more intriguing is how it spans every decade from the late 1950s to the 2010s, suggesting that the factors creating these ultimate one hit wonders aren't tied to any specific era of the music industry. From doo wop groups in the late 50s to EDM producers in the 2010s, the capacity to achieve massive success and then vanish seems to be a constant, if rare, possibility in popular music. In conclusion, we're exploring a phenomenon so rare that it challenges everything we think we know about how the music industry works and what it means to achieve lasting success.
Mr. Mick, let's start at the beginning. Who were the first artists to achieve this impossible feat?
The story begins in 1958 with the Elegants and their hit Little Star. An unreleased a cappella original demo was available also, but this Brooklyn doo-wop group represents the prototype for what we'd see repeated across decades, a perfect storm of timing, talent, and circumstances that could never quite be replicated. The Elegants were five Italian American teenagers from Staten Island who formed in 1956. Little Star was actually adapted from a traditional French song, and this is the same melody we know as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But what the Elegants did with it was pure 1950s magic. They slowed it down, added that distinctive doo wop harmony, and created something that felt both familiar and completely fresh. The song hit number one in August 1958 and stayed there for 1 week. But here's where the story gets fascinating. The Elegants had formed their own label, Apt Records, specifically to release this single. They didn't have the infrastructure or industry connections that major labels provided, which partly explains why they couldn't capitalize on their success. But even more telling, they couldn't recapture the lightning in a bottle quality that made Little Star special. Their follow up attempts included the song True Love Affair, but it didn't even crack the top 100. What happened? Part of it was timing. By 1959, the music industry was rapidly evolving. Rock and roll was becoming more sophisticated, Motown was emerging, and the simple innocence of doo wop was starting to feel dated. The Elegants were caught in a transitional moment where their particular sound had exactly one moment of perfect cultural relevance. But there's something deeper here about the nature of doo wop as a genre. The best doo wop songs often succeeded through perfect simplicity, a great melody, tight harmonies, and an emotional sincerity that couldn't be manufactured. Little Star had all these elements aligned perfectly, but that perfection was almost impossible to replicate deliberately. When the Elegants tried to follow up, they were essentially trying to recreate magic, and magic doesn't work that way. The cultural impact of Little Star extended far beyond its chart success. It became a standard for countless other artists' cover, and it helped establish the template for what a perfect doo-wop song could sound like. Ironically, the Elegants' inability to follow up their success might have actually enhanced the song's legendary status. It remains frozen in time as a perfect moment rather than being diminished by inferior follow ups. In conclusion, the Elegants established the blueprint for the ultimate one hit wonder, a perfect song at that perfect moment, followed by an inability to recapture the circumstances that made that perfection possible.
Mr. Mick, moving into the 1960s, I understand we get into some truly bizarre territory with songs like Alley Oop. What was happening in this era?
The 1960s gave us some of the most wonderfully weird entries in this exclusive club, starting with the Hollywood Argyles and their caveman anthem Alley Oop in 1960. The song perfectly captures how novelty could intersect with genuine musical quality to create something that was both ridiculous and irresistible. Alley Oop was based on V.T. Hamlin's comic strip character, a time traveling caveman. The song was essentially a musical adaptation of a comic book, complete with primitive grunts and Stone Age references. But what made it work was the production quality and the commitment to the concept. Gary Paxton, who was part of the Hollywood Argyles, understood that novelty songs couldn't just be jokes. They had to be well crafted jokes with genuine musical merit. The song hit number one in July 1960, but here's where it gets interesting from a music industry perspective. The Hollywood Argyles weren't really a group in the traditional sense. They were more like a studio project built around session musicians. This was becoming increasingly common in the early 1960s as producers began to understand they could create groups specifically for individual songs rather than developing long term artist careers. This approach worked perfectly for Alley Oop because the song didn't need artistic depth or personal expression. It needed professional execution of a fun concept. But it also explains why there was no follow up success. The Hollywood Argyles didn't have a musical identity beyond this one song, and Paxton was more interested in production work than maintaining a performing career under this particular name. But novelty songs also represent a trap for artists. Once you've identified with a particular gimmick or concept, it becomes extremely difficult to establish credibility outside that narrow lane. The Hollywood Argyles were forever associated with caveman comedy, making it nearly impossible for them to be taken seriously with different material. The novelty acts had difficulty making it after their success. Weird Al Yankovic is a talented artist, but he is rarely taken seriously. And even an established artist such as Rick Derringer had a setback in his career due to his association with Yankovic. The lasting influence of Alley Oop can be seen in how it established a template for concept driven novelty songs that would appear throughout the 1960s and beyond. Artists learned that novelty could be a path to success, but also a creative dead end if not managed carefully. And there's some other songs that are similar to this. Honorable mentions: the Left Bank, Walk Away Renee, a psychedelic garage band that dreamed too much, the Electric Prunes, I Had Too Much to Dream Last Night, the Zombies, Time of the Season, a sunshine pop group that couldn't survive the 70s, Grassroots, Let's Live for Today, the Turtles, Happy Together, a costume rock act that ruled TV but lost the charts, Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Box Tops, the Mamas and the Papas, the Byrds, the Animals, rivals to the Beatles, Dave Clark 5, Buffalo Springfield, For What It's Worth. All bands that hit the top and then didn't really do much after that. In conclusion, the novelty phenomenon of the early 1960s showed how specific cultural moments could create massive success for highly specialized material that had no sustainable follow up potential.
Mr. Mick, now we get the ultimate example. Zazer and Evans with in the year 2025. What makes this perfect case study?
Zager and Evans in the year 2525 represents the absolute pinnacle of the ultimate one-hit wonder phenomenon. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this might be the most fascinating chart story in popular music history. The song is science fiction, social commentary, and apocalyptic philosophy all wrapped up in a deceptively simple folk rock arrangement that somehow became the biggest hit of 1969. Rick Evans wrote the song in 1964 while serving in the Navy, inspired by the folk protest movement and his concerns about technology and human progress. The lyrics take listeners on a journey through future millennia, painting increasingly disturbing pictures of humanity's technological dependence and eventual extinction. We're talking about a song that references genetic manipulation, artificial wounds, and the last heat death of the universe. Not exactly typical top 40 material. But here's what made it extraordinary. The song tapped into late 1960s anxieties about technology, war, and social change in a way that both felt specific and universal. 1969 was the year of the moon landing, Woodstock, and widespread protests against the Vietnam War. Audiences were simultaneously excited about technological progress and terrified where it might lead. In the year 2525 captured that contradiction perfectly. The mutual musical arrangement was brilliant in its simplicity. Denny Zager's guitar work and the sparse production created an otherworldly atmosphere that supported the lyrical content without overwhelming it. The song built gradually, adding layers of intensity as it progressed through the millennia, creating a genuine sense of journey and escalation that most pop songs never attempt. When it hit number one in July 1969, it stayed there for 6 weeks, longer than almost any other song that year. It sold over 4 million copies worldwide and became a genuine cultural phenomenon. But here's where the story becomes truly remarkable. Zager and Evans never had another song chart anywhere, not even in the lower reaches of the Hot 100. Their follow up attempts included songs like Mr. Turnkey and Help One Man Today, but these felt like pale attempts to recapture the cosmic scope of their hit. The problem was that in the year 2525 wasn't just a song, it was a complete artistic statement that couldn't be replicated or extended. How do you follow up a song that literally takes listeners to the end of time? The cultural impact of In the Year 2525 extended far beyond its chart success. It became a touchstone for environmental and technological anxiety that remains relevant today. The song has been covered by numerous artists and continues to appear in science fiction films and television shows, proving its lasting cultural resonance. In conclusion, In the Year 2525 stands as the perfect example of how ultimate one hit wonders can occur when artists create something so specific and complete that it exists as a singular artistic statement rather than the beginning of a sustainable career.
Moving into the late 70s, you got M with pop music. How did the changing industry landscape and the emergence of a new wave affect these ultimate one hit wonders?
M in pop music represent a fascinating evolution in the ultimate one hit wonder phenomenon because they emerged from the late 1970s cultural transition between disco's death and new wave's birth, showing how even sophisticated, forward looking artists with industry knowledge could create perfect cultural moments that proved impossible to replicate. Robin Scott, the man behind the M Project, was far from a naive newcomer when he created pop music in 1979. He had been part of various bands throughout the 1970s, including Mighty Baby, and had worked as a producer and session musician. This industry experience meant that when he conceived pop music, he was operating from a position of professional knowledge rather than accidental inspiration. which makes his failure to follow up even more instructive about how ultimate one hit wonders actually work. Scott understood these industry dynamics and positioned pop music perfectly within this transitional moment. The song was built around a hypnotic bass line that drew from disco's rhythmic sophistication, but it featured the minimalist aesthetic and ironic sensibility that would define new wave. The synthesizer work was sparse but effective, creating textures that felt both futuristic and immediate. Most importantly, Scott's vocal delivery was detached and almost robotic, perfectly capturing the emotional distance that would become essential to New Wave's artistic identity. The lyrics were perhaps the most sophisticated element of the entire production. Pop music was more meta music before that concept had been properly theorized, a song about popular music that functioned as perfect popular music itself. References to New York, London, Paris, Munich created a sense of international sophistication, while phrases like talk about pop music worked both as hooks and as cultural commentary. The song managed to be simultaneously about popular music and an example of it, creating the kind of conceptual sophistication that would become crucial to 1980s alternative music. When pop music hit number one in the US in December 1979, it represented something genuinely new. This wasn't novelty like alley oop or cosmic folk rock like In the Year 2525. This was sophisticated dance music that worked both in clubs and on the radio, suggesting that ultimate one hit wonders didn't have to emerge from accidents or naive inspiration. A knowledgeable industry professional could create breakthrough cultural moments through careful analysis of industry trends and cultural currents. But here's what's fascinating about Scott's inability to replicate this success. He was simultaneously too far ahead of his time and too far behind it. Pop music anticipated the MTV era with its visual sensibility and electronic production techniques, but it arrived just before the infrastructure existed to support that aesthetic. The song succeeded in 1979, but MTV wouldn't launch until 1981, and the new wave movement wouldn't achieve full commercial acceptance until the mid 1980s. Meanwhile, disco's death had created a temporary vacuum in dance music that pop music filled perfectly. But that vacuum was rapidly filled by other developments. Hip hop was beginning to emerge from New York's underground scenes. Electronic music was becoming more sophisticated through the work of producers like Giorgio Moroder. The specific cultural niche that pop music had occupied was disappearing even as the song was climbing the charts. Scott's follow up attempts revealed both his artistic sophistication and the impossibility of his situation. Songs like Moonlight and Muzak and Official Secrets demonstrated that he clearly understood his own artistic vision and he could create it and execute it competently. The production quality was professional, the conceptual sophistication was maintained, and the electronic textures showed continuous innovation. But these songs couldn't find that same cultural sweet spot that pop music had occupied because the sweet spot had been created by temporary industry conditions that no longer existed. More specifically, you can hear pop music's DNA and Devo's conceptual approach to pop music in early hip hop production techniques and in the way that bands like Talking Heads integrated intellectual concepts with danceable rhythms. The song proved that electronic music could achieve both artistic sophistication and commercial success, providing a template that countless artists would follow. From a technological perspective, pop music demonstrated how new recording technologies and production techniques could create opportunities for innovative artists to achieve mainstream success. Scott had used relatively simple electronic equipment to create textures that sounded futuristic and distinctive, proving that technological innovation didn't require massive budgets or major label support. But the song showed also how rapidly these technological opportunities could disappear as other artists adopted similar techniques and as audience expectations evolved. By 1981, the electronic production approaches that had made pop music sound cutting edge were becoming commonplace, leaving Scott without a distinctive sonic signature. In conclusion, M and pop music proved that ultimate one hit wonders weren't limited to novelty songs or accidental success. Sometimes sophisticated artists could create perfect cultural moments that simply couldn't be replicated.
Mr. Mick, the 1980s brought us something completely different with John Hammers and Miami Vice theme. How did television change the game for these artists?
Jan Hammer's Miami Vice theme represents a unique entry in our catalog because it demonstrates how television could create massive musical success outside the traditional music industry infrastructure. Hammer was already an established jazz fusion musician who had worked with the Mahavishnu Orchestra and Jeff Beck, but Miami Vice theme launched him into an entirely different stratosphere of popularity. The song hit number 1 in November 1985, making it the first and only instrumental television theme to achieve that feat. But what's remarkable about this isn't just the commercial success, it's how the song perfectly captured the aesthetic and cultural moment that Miami Vice represented. The synthesizer heavy arrangement, the driving rhythm, and the cinematic scope created a sonic landscape that felt both futuristic and immediately accessible. Hammer composed the theme specifically for the show, working closely with the series creator Michael Mann to create music that would function as more than just background accompaniment. The theme needed to establish mood, suggest narrative possibilities, and work as standalone music that viewers might want to purchase and play outside the context of the show. This was a relatively new concept in television production. The idea that TV themes could be legitimate pop music rather than just functional accompaniment. But the TV connection to the show also explains why Hammer couldn't replicate this success. His follow up releases, including albums like Escape from Television and Snapshots, were musically sophisticated and well produced, but they lacked the cultural context that had made Miami Vice theme so powerful. Without the visual component and the broader cultural phenomenon, Hammer's music was appreciated primarily by jazz fusion fans rather than mainstream pop audiences. The television connection also created a unique problem for follow up success. Audiences associated Hammer specifically with Miami Vice, making it difficult for him to establish an independent musical identity. When the show ended, much of his mainstream audience disappeared with it, despite his continued musical activity and critical acclaim within jazz circles. The influence of the Miami Vice theme on 1980s music production was enormous. The song helped establish synthesizers as legitimate lead instruments in popular music and demonstrated how electronic music could both achieve artistic sophistication and commercial success. You can hear its influence in everything from film soundtracks to early house music. In conclusion, Jan Hammer's Miami Vice theme showed how television could create new pathways to musical success while simultaneously creating limitations that made sustained success nearly impossible.
So, Mr. Mick, moving to now we get the ultimate example of Sagar and Evans within the year 2025. What makes this a perfect case study?
Yeah, that reminds me of speaking of the late 80s, because it's a similar song. That's Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy. And it seems like it should have led to more success. So when we talk about that, we can also say, what happened here? So Bobby McFerrin's Don't Worry, Be Happy is probably the most perplexing entry in our entire catalog because McFerrin was already an established and respected artist with serious musical credentials when the song became a phenomenon. Unlike other artists, he had a long career before and after his number 1 hit, but somehow managed to never chart again on the Hot 100, which tells us something fascinating about how specific songs can transcend their creator's usual audience. McFerrin was a classically trained vocalist and an accomplished jazz performer who had been pushing the boundaries of what the human voice could do throughout the 1980s. His a cappella performances and innovative vocal techniques had earned him critical acclaim and a devoted following among jazz and world music fans. But Don't Worry, Be Happy reached an entirely different audience, one that had never heard of Bobby McFerrin and didn't necessarily care about his artistic background. The song hit number 1 in September 1988 and stayed there for 2 weeks, becoming the first a cappella song to reach number 1 in the rock era. What made it remarkable wasn't just the vocal technique, though McFerrin's ability to create an entire musical arrangement using only his voice was genuinely impressive. but the way it captured a specific cultural moment when audiences were hungry for uncomplicated positivity. But here's what's fascinating about McFerrin's situation. His follow up releases were actually quite successful within his usual musical sphere. Albums like Medicine Music and Circle Songs received critical acclaim and sold well to his core audience. He continued to tour internationally, collaborate with major orchestras, and push the boundaries of vocal performance. By most measures, he had a successful and sustained career. The reason he never charted again on the Hot 100 wasn't because he stopped making music or lost his talent. It was because Don't Worry, Be Happy had reached a mainstream pop audience that wasn't interested in following him back to his usual artistic territory. The song succeeded by being completely atypical of his normal work, which made it impossible to replicate with his regular musical approach. This creates a unique situation where an artist's greatest commercial success became disconnected from their actual artistic identity. McFerrin's failure to chart again wasn't really a failure. It was a return to his natural audience after a brief detour into mainstream success. In conclusion, Bobby McFerrin's story demonstrates how ultimate one hit wonders can occur even when the artist continues to have a successful career, showing that chart success and artistic success operate in different spheres that sometimes intersect but rarely align permanently.
Mr. Mick, what changed as we move into the 1990s and beyond?
The evolution of ultimate one hit wonders from the 1990s through the 2010s reveals how changing industry dynamics and the technological shifts created new pathways for achieving this rare feat while also making it even more difficult to sustain success. Sheriff's When I'm With You, hitting number one in 1989, represents a unique case. The song was originally recorded in 1982, but only achieved success 7 years later through grassroots radio support, proving that songs could find their audiences through completely unexpected timelines. The band had already broken up when their hit peaked, making them the only disbanded group to achieve posthumous number one success. The 2000s brought us Crazy Town's Butterfly, which demonstrated how new metal and MTV culture could create massive success through visual presentation and genre blending. Built around a Red Hot Chili Peppers sample, the song perfectly captured early 2000s party culture, but proved impossible to follow up as a rap rock genre quickly fell out of favor. Daniel Powter's Bad Day in 2006 showed how reality television could create new pathways to success. The song's use as American Idol's elimination theme created weekly exposure to millions of viewers, but this television dependent success couldn't translate to sustainable chart performance without continued media integration. The 2010s viral era brought Bauer's Harlem Shake, which achieved number one success through user generated video content rather than traditional promotion. This represents a completely new model where songs became platforms for creative participation rather than passive consumption. But the viral format proved impossible to replicate. The streaming era's global reach enabled artists like Magic Rude and OMI Cheerleader to achieve massive international success through algorithmic playlist placement and cross cultural appeal. But the same systems that elevated these songs could quickly bury follow up releases when audience engagement metrics declined. In conclusion, each era created new opportunities for ultimate one-hit wonders while also establishing new limitations, showing how technological and cultural changes consistently generated fresh ways to achieve unrepeatable success, earnestness, and emotional sincerity. It became the perfect soundtrack for disappointment and resilience.
Looking across all these decades, what patterns emerge? What these artists have in common beyond never charting again? Famous one hit wonders, songs that ruled the charts once and never again, shine spotlight on those unforgettable tracks that, for fleeting moment, capture the world's attention and define an era. These songs often become cultural anthems, blasting through radios, dance floors, and car stereos, embedding themselves in our memories with infectious hooks and unforgettable lyrics. Yet Just as quickly as they rose to fame, the creators faded from their spotlight, unable to participate the magic of their singular success. So, Mr. Mick, how we wrap up this episode
Well,
of
we
our
have Sure, we examine the entire catalog of ultimate one-hit wonders from the Elegance to OMI. Several fascinating patterns emerge that reveal deeper truths about how the music industry works and why certain types of success are inherently unsustainable. The most obvious pattern is what I call perfect cultural timing. Each of these artists achieves success by capturing a very specific cultural moment that couldn't be replicated or extended. The Elegance caught the final wave of doo-wop innocence before rock and roll became more sophisticated. Zager and Evans channeled late 1960s technological anxiety at exactly the moment when audiences were most receptive to apocalyptic messaging. M anticipated MTV aesthetic before MTV existed, and Bauer created the perfect soundtrack for viral video culture. From a production standpoint, these hits often feature unusual or distinctive sonic elements that make them immediately recognizable but difficult to replicate without seeming repetitive. The a cappella vocal arrangements of Don't Worry, Be Happy, the synthesizer textures of Miami Vice theme, these created unique sonic signatures that will become closely associated with their specific songs rather than creators' overall artistic identities. In any case, we enjoy the unique nature and reminisce about these flashes for your listening pleasure. In conclusion, the patterns across decades of ultimate one hit wonders reveal that this phenomenon occurs when highly specific artistic material achieves perfect timing with cultural moments, creating success that is inherently unrepeatable because it depends on external factors rather than sustainable artistic identity.
Yes, indeed. Very well said, Mr. Meg. Very well said. These one hit wonders serve as a reminders of the unpredictable nature of fame, where a single track can immortalize an artist even their career never again reaches such heights. Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
Thanks for the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Dr. of Digital Smith, PhD. Also listen to the Dr. of Digital podcast. And of course, pick up a couple volumes that I have on Amazon, On Track, Ian Hunter, and Burning America.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Meg, the Doctor Digital, the podcast itself, as well authors. So that will be another people or another authors will rise in our decade. So, Mr. Meg, thank you so much for your time.
Until next time, Deus Volt.
More to come, people. See you soon.